شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. And lastly, we're talking about مشروعية التنفل قبل الجمعة, the legality of performing optional prayers before the Jumu'ah. And we said there are no specific amounts of rak'ahs that have been specified to be performed before Salatul Jumu'ah. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ encourages a person to do whatever he's able to do. And he mentioned the hadith here from Uqbar ibn al-Harith. Actually, this one narration here, the one by Uqbar ibn al-Harith, is different. The one from Abi Hurairah, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man ightasala," whoever takes a bath, ثم أتى الجمعة, and then he comes to Jumu'ah, وصلى ما قدر له, and then he prays what has been decreed for him or what he's able to pray. No specification. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever he is able to do. ثم أنصت حتى يفرغ من خطبته, and then he keeps quiet until the Imam concludes his khutbah. ثم يصلي معه, and then he prays along with him. غفر له ما بينه وبين الجمعة الأخرى وفضل 3 أيام. He shall receive forgiveness between this Jumu'ah and the other one, an additional 3 days. Did I translate all of that?
One with the bat you did, Abu Hurairah.
Maybe I didn't. Let me translate it all. On the authority of Abi Hurairah, the Messenger of Allah said, whoever takes a bath, and then he comes to Jumu'ah and pray whatever he's able to, and then he keeps quiet until the Imam concludes his khutbah, and then he prays along with him, he shall receive forgiveness from what is between this Jumu'ah and the other one, an additional 3 days. Also, we said that the Imam, if he sees a person entering the masjid and he hasn't prayed 2 rak'ahs on Yawm al-Jumu'ah, it is a sunnah for him to encourage them or direct them to pray the 2 rak'ahs before sitting. And we said that this is to be done even if the Imam is given the khutbah on Yawm al-Jumu'ah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if any of you come, إِذَا جَاءَ أَحَدُكُمْ يَوْمَ الْجُمَعَةِ وَالْإِمَامِ يَخْطُبُ فَلْيَرْكَعْ رَكْعَتَيْنِ يعني قبل أن يجلس وَلَيَتَجَوَّزْ فِيهِمَا. If you come on Yawm al-Jumu'ah and the Imam is given the khutbah, do not sit. First pray 2 rak'ahs, make them brief, and this should be something that is done even if the Imam is given the khutbah, as the Prophet ﷺ said. If a person is sleepy and there's a possibility for him to move from the position he's in, he's allowed to change positions on Jumu'ah. Okay? Sometimes you're in Jumu'ah and sometimes on this day it's very peaceful. And so people have a tendency to nod. Okay? And if this happens, it's recommended that you change your position. Move. Okay? We have this narration from Ibn Umar. He says, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا نعس أحدكم وهو في المسجد فليتحول من مجلسه ذلك إلى غيره. If one of you become drowsy while you're in the masjid, then change the place where you're sitting to some other place, some other position. Now, if you happen to sleep or lose your consciousness, you find yourself raising your head up, your cheeks, your chin off of your chest, and don't know what the Imam has said, you were sleeping. If that occurs, go and perform your wudu before you perform the prayer. There is a position from some of the scholars that if you sit down and you sleep, it does not invalidate your wudu. That position, is the position of some of the scholars, but it's not a strong position. And one of the old scholars said that he had this position until on one Jumu'ah he sat next to a man who was asleep, and this man had passed gas. And so when it was time to pray, he told him, go and make wudu. You validated your wudu, you were sleeping. He said, no, I wasn't sleeping. He said, yes, you passed gas. He said, no, it wasn't me, it was you. Right? He said, once this person said that to me, I recognized how a person is unaware in a sleepful state, and I viewed this lack of consciousness and changed my position about the sleeping person, and that if he sleeps, he has to renew his wudu. Right? So the hadith says, "Man nama falyatawadda." Whoever falls asleep, let him renew his wudu. We've already discussed, I think, the obligation of the Salatul Jumu'ah, and the Prophet ﷺ says the person who leaves off ثلاث جمعين تهاونا بها تضع الله على قلبه. The person who leaves three consecutive Jumu'ahs alone, he doesn't come out of negligence, Allah shall conceal his heart. Not conceal. He will put a covering on his heart. And one narration says he will cause his heart to be that of a man, his heart to be that of a hypocrite. Right? So we have an Usama رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من ترك ثلاث جمعات من غير عذر كتب من المنافقين. Whoever leaves 3 Jumu'ahs without any excuse, he shall be written down amongst the hypocrites. Okay? ومن ترك هذا ابن عباس قال رسول الله عفوا عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال من ترك الجمعة 3 جمعة متواليات فقد نبذ الإسلام وراء ظهره. Whoever gives up Jumu'ah, 3 consecutive Jumu'ahs, he has cast Islam behind his back. He has cast Islam behind his back. So, for the brothers then, the obligation of performing the Jumu'ah is very emphasized. And the person who is negligent in doing this, لا يؤمن عليه أن يموت منافقا. You don't feel secure that this person will not die a hypocrite. Okay? So it's an obligation. We said that there is an exception for those who may attend Jumu'ah, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Jumu'ah is an obligation on each Muslim in congregation, except for 4. Okay? The hadith of Tariq ibn Shihab عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الجمعة حق واجب على كل مسلم في جماعة إلا 4 عبد مملوك وامرأة أو صبي أو مريض. الجمعة حق واجب على كل مسلم في جماعة إلا 4 عبد مملوك أو امرأة أو صبي أو مريض. The Jumu'ah, according to Tariq ibn Shihab, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said the Jumu'ah is an obligation on each Muslim in congregation, except for a slave that is owned, a lady, a young child, and a sick person. These four are not an obligation. A slave, a lady, a child, and a sick person.
How sick?
What is the lady?
And mother.
الجمعة؟
لا ليس بواجب عليها. صلاة الجمعة ليست واجبة على المرأة، إنما هو واجب على الرجال. No, she doesn't have to come. It's optional for the sisters to come to Jumu'ah. It's not an obligation. If they come, they pray just like the brothers who come to Jumu'ah, pray 2 rakahs, and they don't have to pray dhuhr. But if they don't come and they pray at home, they have to pray dhuhr, 4 rakahs. Right? Now, we said included in the sick person is the person who has to take care of the sick individual. You may have a person who is terminally ill, and there has to be someone taking care of him and from moment to moment. Otherwise, some serious things may happen. Not only does this sick person have an excuse, but the person who's it's necessary for him to be there taking, he has an excuse as well. A person has a sick member at home, and they need to have constant care. And if you go out for an hour, 2, 3 hours, things may turn upside down. Then you have an excuse because of that in taking care of that person and staying away from Jumu'ah. Also, I don't know if we did this. It seems like we did some of this. A person on Jumu'ah, if you are traveling, you're moving. Let's say you go from state to state, you land on Jumu'ah in a particular city, but you're still in motion. It's not an obligation to perform Jumu'ah. If you're in the city limits and you hear the adhan for the Jumu'ah, you go to it. But let's say you're in motion, traveling, okay? And you just come to rest and you're moving on. It's not an obligation to perform Jumu'ah. The Prophet ﷺ on none of his journeys performed Jumu'ah, in spite of him having such a large number of companions with him. On none of his journeys did he perform Jumu'ah. For this reason we have the hadith عن أبي هريرة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم قال ليس على مسافر جمعة. ليس على مسافر جمعة. It's not an obligation on a person traveling to perform Jumu'ah. Okay? وليقول عمر لأحدهم أخرج فإن الجمعة لا تحبس عن سفر. Person had a problem with traveling on Jumu'ah, Umar said, go and travel. Jumu'ah doesn't prevent anyone from traveling. Okay? So, because of this practice of the Prophet ﷺ, then if a person is moving and all of this, and he's in the process of traveling, even if he comes to rest at a place, and it's not an obligation on him to perform Jumu'ah, okay, if he's still in motion. If he comes to rest and he's in the vicinity and the Jumu'ah is being, he hears the call for him, he should answer it. Okay? Now, there are excuses also, or circumstances when a person doesn't have to attend Jumu'ah. The rain that we had was it last week? Or week before last? That rain was an excuse for people not to come to Jumu'ah. In rain, that's an excuse to stay away. Of course, the Imam has to be here. Right? In case somebody shows up. And so if you have the Imam and one person, right, the Jumu'ah has to go on. If you have the Imam, right, And Sheikh Mustafa comes out. I'm up here giving the khutbah, right? And afterwards, we can do Jumu'ah, as long as you have two individuals. Now, we know this because of the hadith of Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, أنه قال لمؤذنه في يوم المطير إذا قلت أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله فلا تقل حي على الصلاة قل صلوا في بيوتكم. Ibn Abbas said to the person who used to call the adhan on his behalf on a rainy day, he says, when you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, do not say Hayya ala salah. Don't say that. Rather say Sallu fi buyutikum. Pray in your homes. Okay? Pray Sallu fi buyutikum. Sallu fi buyutikum. Sallu fi buyutikum. Okay? فكأن الناس استنكروا ذلك. The people, it seemed like the people were critical of this. And he said, فقال أتعجبون من ذا? Are you amazed at this? قد فعل ذا من هو خير مني. One who is better than me did this. Meaning the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. إن الجمعة عزمة. Jumu'ah is an obligation. وإني كرهت أن أخرجكم فتمشوا في الطين والدحض. And I disliked that I should cause a difficulty and have you come walking in the mud and the slippery conditions. Okay? So, notice that he, instead of saying Hayya ala salah, he said Sallu fi buyutikum. That's one way that this may be done when calling the adhan. The other ways we have seen in the hadith of Ibn Umar, he would allow for the whole adhan to be completed, and then at the end, the person, he himself would say, Sallu fi buyutikum. And you can say it once or twice, but sufficient times to make it known to the people that you are sure that they heard what you're saying, then praying in the home. Okay? If one is sufficient, one. Twice or three times, whatever is sufficient. Sallu fi buyutikum. Sallu fi buyutikum. Oh, sallu fi rihalikum. Whatever. But this is something that shows that there is a permissibility if the conditions are like that, rainy and wet, or if you have snow, okay, or anything like that, that a person has a concession not to come out and participate in the Jumu'ah. We have a narration from Abu al-Malih from his father, أنه شهد النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم زمن الحديبية في يوم جمعة وأصابه مطر لم تبتل أسفل نعالهم فأمرهم أن يصلوا في رحالهم. Abu Malih, he said from his father that he witnessed the Prophet ﷺ during the period of Hudaybiyah on a day of Jumu'ah when it had rained. The rain was so light that it didn't even cause the bottom of their sandals to get moistened. And he said, and he commanded them to pray in their homes. Right? Now, this is significant because sometimes people say, well, unless you have torrential rain and you can't see anything in front of you, right? If it's not that hard, then you have to come to the masjid. But that's not really the way we see the Prophet ﷺ used to conduct himself. As a matter of fact, as Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, you may have intermittent rain. It starts and it stops. Right? Starts and it stops. You may be in the masjid when the rain is no longer there, you're allowed to do the jump. If you have a situation, it's raining off and on hard, then for a moment, maybe an hour or so, it stops. And then again, for hours of rain, then the moment it stops. If the prayer comes in at that period when the rain is not coming down, you're allowed to join your prayers. Okay? Doesn't have to be coming down at that moment. Hey. Okay. But the Jumu'ah, of course, should be done in the masjid.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Alright? Jumu'ah should be done in the masjid. Actually, the hadith that we saw from Tariq ibn Shihab, Al-Jumu'ah haqqun wajibun ala kulli muslimin fi jama'atin. Right? That shows that there has to be congregation. But the practice of the Prophet ﷺ is that even though you had different masjids around, outside Medina, when it came for Jumu'ah, they gave up the prayers in those smaller masjids and came to the Prophet's masjid. I think this happens a lot in the Muslim countries. That you have a bigger masjid where everybody goes and the little small ones, that is according to the Sunnah. Right? And Aisha radiallahu anha قالت كان الناس ينتابون يوم الجمعة من منازلهم العوالي يعني هي القرى التي حول المدينة. That they used to come from the outskirts, about 4 miles, and come and join the Prophet ﷺ in the congregation prayer in Medina. So the practice that we find in a lot of the villages where this actually occurs, it used to happen, I know, in Riyadh, those little masjids on Yom al-Jumu'ah, nobody go to them. They had the Masjid al-Jami' and everybody headed for there. Okay? That's based on this practice that was there in Medina during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. طيب. عطاء used to say إذا كنت في قرية جامعة فنودي بالصلاة من يوم الجمعة فحق عليك أن تشهدها سمعت النداء ولم تسمعه. عطاء, this is Atha ibn Abi Rabah. Atha actually was one of those tabi'een in the time of the companions used to give fatwas. Right? This is Atha ibn Abi Rabah. Now, he was not a very handsome individual. As a matter of fact, every physical defect that you could think of, Atha probably had it. But they said once he spoke, it was like he was being assisted by an angel. Right? I mean, because of the knowledge. Ibn Abbas used to say to the people of Mecca, تَسْأَلُونَنِي وَعِنْدَكُمْ عَطَاء. You asking me and you have Atha in your presence? That says a lot for his scholarship and his knowledge. Right? Yeah. Anyway, Atha used to say, look, if you're in a village, right, where the people are gathered and there is a place for the congregational prayer like Jumu'ah, it is an obligation on you to participate in the Jumu'ah, whether you hear the call to the prayer or you don't hear it. If you know what's going on, go and participate in the congregational prayer. Okay? Anyhow. Okay, that was the sunnah in respect to where it should be prayed. The times for Jumu'ah. There are 2 distinct times for the congregational prayer on Friday. 2 distinct times. One is the same time of Dhuhr, and the other is before that time.
Before that time.
Before Dhuhr.
Oh,
Okay? Before Dhuhr. Now, I'm going to mention a few narrations. And we're going to notice that the adhan on Jumu'ah was normally given before the time of Dhuhr came in. The adhan on Jumu'ah, unlike the adhan for Dhuhr, which is normally given when the sun moves from directly overhead, normally on Jumu'ah the adhan was given before that time. brothers looking at me like that. All right, let's deal with some text. According to Salama ibn Aqwa, he said, كنا نجمع مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Yani this is the performance of the prayer. We used to pray the prayer. إذا زالت الشمس. When the sun would move from directly overhead. ثم نرجع نتتبع الفيء. And we will return seeking the shade provided by some of the structures around. Now, I'm going to read another narration. عن أنس أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم كان يصلي الجمعة حين تميل الشمس. كان يصلي الجمعة. هذا ليس لخطبة. You're dealing with the salah. He would pray the Jumu'ah when the sun was now starting to move from overhead. If we take into consideration the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would give his khutbah, and sometimes he would recite Surah Al-Qaf. In some narration it said he recited the whole of Surah Al-Bara'ah. That's total, right? And then prayed the prayer, and at this time the sun was just moving overhead. Obviously the adhan was called way before that time. So on Yawm al-Jumu'ah then, the regulations for the prayer differs from the regulations for Jumu'ah. So you don't have to be concerned whether, oh, this time for Jumu'ah is in, so you can't call the adhan now, or you have to wait. No. It can be called before that time, actually way before that time, if the prayer is performed like that. We have some narrations, for example, which clearly show the two times when the Prophet ﷺ used to pray. Some of them show that he would pray, the prayer would occur after the sun moved from directly overhead, like we saw in some of these narrations here. We have another narration from Jabir ibn Abdullah. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا زالت الشمس صلى الجمعة. This is similar to the other narratives that we've seen. Once the sun had moved from directly overhead, he would pray Jumu'ah. Okay? Now, this was on occasions. طيب? Okay. We have that. We know that. Now, think about this particular narration here. This narration from Jabir ibn Abdullah. He said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يصلي الجمعة ثم نذهب إلى جمالنا فنريحها حين تزول الشمس. يعني أنه واضح. He said, we used to pray the Jumu'ah with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then we would go to our camels. The khutbah was over, the salah was over, everything was finished. We would go from the masjid to our localities where we had camels watering the fields. We would loosen them, and then the sun would start to move from directly over here. This is an indication that everything of Jumu'ah started way before the time of Dhuhr and was completed before the time of Dhuhr even came in. For this reason, Imam Ahmad says, for Jumu'ah, there are two times, taken from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. One is at the time of Dhuhr, and the other allows us to perform it even before that time, as the Prophet ﷺ used to do. So we have two practices that we get from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Right now. And we have actually some of the companions who used to do a little bit more than that. We have this narration from Abdullah ibn Salama. He said, Sallallahu bin Abdullah Jumu'ah duha. You do that today, boy, people will stone you to death. That Abdullah prayed Jumu'ah at the time of duha. That's just maybe an hour or so after the rising of the sun. Right? He says, وَخَشِيتُ عَلَيْكُمُ الْحَرِّ. He said, I was afraid that it would be too hot for you. I had it later. Right? وعن سعيد بن سويد, he said, قال صلى بنا معاوية الجمعة الضحى. He said Muawiyah did the same thing, prayed Jumu'ah at the same time. Actually, we have a narration from Bilal al-Absi. He says, أن عمارا صلى بالناس جمعة والناس فريقان بعضهم يقول زالت الشمس وبعضهم يقول لم تزل. Ammar led them in the Jumu'ah. Some of the people said, man, did the sun come from over here? And others say, no, it didn't. The point is, the Sahaba in their practice understood that Jumu'ah had two times that you had the ability to pray in. One before the time of Dhuhr, even if it was early, and the other after the time, or the time when Dhuhr comes in. Okay? So both of those, it gives you some leeway in performing this particular prayer. How many people are necessary to be there for the establishment of the Jumu'ah? We just mentioned, I gave it away a few moments ago. You don't need more than 2 individuals. Okay, you don't need more than 2 individuals. Imam and 1 person. If you have Imam and 2, khayr. Imam and 4, barakallah fikum, right? And whatever is more is better. And Shawkani, he says, وَالْحَاصِلُ أن صلاة الجماعة قد صحت بواحد مع الإمام وصلاة الجمعة هي صلاة من الصلوات فمن اشترط فيها زيادة على ما تنعقد به الجماعة فعليه الدليل ولا دليل. He says, and what we conclude is that the congregational prayer, we know it is authentic that it can be established with 2 individuals, 1 person along with the Imam. And the Jumu'ah prayers is one of those other prayers. And so whoever stipulates or says that you need more than 2 for the establishment of this Jama'ah or this congregational prayer, he needs some evidence, and there is none. Right? Now, that's taken into consideration. You have about 15 different positions on how many people you need in order to have Jumu'ah. Starting from 40-something all the way down to 2. So, yeah. Sheikh Nasr, actually, he was in agreement with this particular position here. Yeah. Okay. All right, all this is okay. Have some things here we need to take note of. Okay. The person, let's just come back. Let's deal with the khutbah. It's an obligation to give the khutbah on Yawm al-Jumu'ah. Right? An obligation to give the khutbah on Yawm al-Jumu'ah. And this, the Prophet ﷺ never had Jumu'ah once, not even once, without giving the khutbah. Okay? And so it's an obligation. Now, also you have the command to go and participate in it, to listen to the reminder and perform it. So all of these things there shows that it's an obligation to give the khutbah. And we know from the practices of the companions, and we have a narration that when the Prophet ﷺ entered the masjid, once he sat on the minbar, or once he got up on the minbar, he would give the salams to the congregation. Okay? There is a discussion in this chain of narration that mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ did this, but it is supported by the practices of the companions like Uthman and others. Okay, we have a narration from Abi Nadra. He said, كان عثمان قد كبر فإذا صعد المنبر سلم فأطال قدر ما يقرأ إنسان الكتاب وإسناده صحيح. That Uthman had become elderly, but once he got up on the minbar, he would give the salams, okay? And he would stay sitting the extent that it would allow a person to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, okay, before beginning the khutbah. Just sitting after you give the salams, all right? This is something that continued. Amr ibn Muhajir said, أن عمر ibn عبد العزيز كان إذا استوى على المنبر سلم على الناس وردوا عليه. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz also, once he got on the minbar, he would say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and the congregation would reply. That is an authentic chain of narration. It is a sunnah also that when sitting down in the Jumu'ah, that you face the Imam. That you turn to face the Imam. Okay? You shouldn't have your back looking out on the streets. Alright? Or your face looking out in the back of the yard, or your face looking back that way. The people should be facing and looking at the Imam. And this is how the companions used to conduct themselves with the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid. So they would face him. ﷺ. And the adhan would be given once the khatib sat on the minbar. Okay? Outside of the masjid. Not in the masjid in front of the khatib while he's sitting down and people face the imam and, do their little thing. No. The sunnah is that the adhan is given outside of the masjid, preferably on something raised. Okay? Not in the masjid as commonly occurs in many of the masajid. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we have this narration here. And this narration is from Sa'ib ibn Yazid. He says, كان النداء يوم الجمعة أوله إذا جلس الإمام على المنبر على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أبي بكر وعمر رضي الله عنهما فلما كان عثمان رضي الله عنه وكثر الناس زاد النداء الثالث على الزوراء. وعنه قال كان بلال يؤذن إذا جلس رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم على المنبر يوم الجمعة وإذا نزل أقام. Okay, we have this narration here from Sa'ib ibn Yazid that the adhan would be given on Yawm al-Jum'ah. The first adhan when the Prophet ﷺ sat on the minbar. Okay?
That's the second adhan? That's the one you said before.
Is this the minbar?
Yeah, this is the minbar. Right?
I thought you said that,
Yeah, no, the aqam is considered an adhan.
I meant to call the people to the masjid.
No, there wasn't none of that. That only happened in the time of Uthman. Yeah. Yeah. We said that the first adhan, right, and actually the only adhan that you had in the time of the Prophet ﷺ was when the Imam sat on the minbar. When they're speaking about the adhan, sometimes in the text, they include the iqamah. Like the Prophet ﷺ, yes, that's the second. Like the Prophet ﷺ says, بَيْنَ كُلِّ أَذَانَيْنِ صَلَاةٌ. بَيْنَ كُلِّ أَذَانَيْنِ صَلَاةٌ. Between the two adhan, there is a salah. That is between the adhan and the iqamah. So sometimes in the hadith, the iqamah is called adhan. And this is why when the discussion comes, should you repeat what the imam says? Like the Prophet ﷺ said, if you hear the imam, you repeat what he says. Some of the Ahlul Ilm said yes, because the Allah's Messenger called it an adhan also. Okay? So here, but the first adhan we're talking about was once the Prophet ﷺ sat on the minbar. That was the adhan. And then, this was the only adhan given in the time of the Prophet, Abu Bakr and Umar. Okay? And then, during the time of Uthman, when the people became there, he started a third. Now, the third here is in addition to the iqamah, what the Prophet used to do, this was now a third.
And was that one done earlier?
This was done earlier.
Oh, like they do
Okay.
it in Arabia.
Yeah. You see, that's a mushkila. Let me just tell you. And he used to do this at a place known as Zawra. Okay? In another narration, he said, Bilal used to give the adhan when the Prophet ﷺ sat on the minbar, and once he came down, he would do the iqamah. Okay? Same thing Brother Zayd does. When they come down, the iqamah is given, and then the rolls are straightened up, right? Now, one of the things that is discussed, Uthman radiallahu anhu introduced that first adhan in the marketplace because they didn't have the means to do it where you could hear now the mu'adhin from the masjid. Society had grown a little bit bigger than that. So he initiated this one so that the people in the marketplace would be aware that it's time to head to the masjid, or go home, take a bath, and then come to the masjid. Okay? They couldn't hear it. That was the reason for this being introduced. The only time something like this is looked at as being acceptable if it is done for the same reason. In most of the countries, this reason is absent. They have microphones and you have umpteen masjid almost in the block's radius. Alright? So, there's no need then to have one adhan out in the marketplace. Right? When people can hear this one from the masjid anyway, so the reason that it was introduced by Uthman no longer exists very often in our day and time. Shaykh Nasr rahimahullah ta'ala, when he discusses this, he says, if you take away the consideration as to why it was introduced, and you do it in spite of that, you're not following the sunnah of Uthman. You're doing something else. And so there's no justification then for adding this if the necessity no longer exists. Okay? And so we shouldn't think that, okay, it was done then. You must consider, well, was it done by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Was it done by Abu Bakr, Umar? And then you look at the reason why this man did this, and you say, Khairul Huda Huda Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The best guidance is that of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So yes, this was an ijtihad, and there was a reason for it. If that reason doesn't exist, we should not just go ahead and say, well, it is to be done regardless. That's not a good position, right? And 45 minutes is up. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا